Hi everyone. I'm going to do a last video on some podcast tweaks after listening to all of the drafts. You all should be very proud of the work that you did. Given all of the challenges that you had, I felt like everybody came up with something that was workable. And I know it was tough, and I know you had to be creative. And I think the entire class deserves a big pat on the back for making do with what you had. Um, I would listen to your colleagues' podcasts. It might inspire something for you. Each one of them has something unique or beneficial that you may want to emulate. So I've highlighted a couple of them, but even if I didn't mention yours, there was something redeeming in every single one of them. There was really good work, and you should be really proud of yourselves for putting together what you did, especially since my original plan was to spend the entire month of April working with you in the lab on your individual podcasts, and you didn't have the benefit of that. You got a couple of videos and a couple of chats in class, and it really wasn't ideal. And you came up with stuff that was less, in a less than ideal circumstance. So kudos. Anyway, so I wanted to show you a couple of things, simple things that might help with some easy cleanup um, uh, on your recordings and your podcast. So first one I'm going to go over for you is noise reduction. Okay. So I wanted to remind you that in recording, and you can do this for your own narration, one of the things that you're going to want to do is to say, okay, I've probably got some room noise because I'm recording in my house. If you can, I would encourage you to go into a closet that has a lot of clothes and a lot of padding. Maybe add some extra big pillows in there too to do some sound dampening when you record your voice. I know it seems weird and it's going to feel awkward, but having that little sort of makeshift soundproofing will make your recording sound a little better. When you do your narration too, what I would encourage is most of you need to slow down. We all talk quickly, and we speed up when we have a microphone in front of our face because most of us don't like recording our voices. So what you want to do is sort of slow down. You want to sound like a conversation. The thing that helps me is to try to imagine that I'm sitting across the table from someone and telling them a story. And that should be the tone that you want to take, and you want to say these kinds of things. And the idea, the term for it in the industry is tracking. And you're basically saying, okay, yeah, I have a script and I'm reading, but I don't want to sound like I'm reading. But I also don't want to sound like I'm winging it too much either. Even though some podcast hosts do that, you want to be careful on these because these are a little bit more serious. And what you want people to have the confidence in listening to you, you basically want them to know that you are leading them somewhere, that you're taking them down a path that you've thought about rather than, hey, I'm just talking about this thing that I did, right? If you do that, that doesn't encourage a lot of confidence. And it's much better to say, here, I have a story arc I'm going to take you on. Let's go along on this ride, and I'm going to show you this data that I found, and I'm going to show you these people that I've talked to. And at the end of this, if you stick around for 20 to 30 minutes, at the end of this, you're going to have some insight into something that you didn't really have before. And I would say each one of you has done that in your podcast. So I keep that in the back of your mind as you're doing that. Okay. Okay, the first thing we're going to look at is noise reduction. Okay, so remember when you're recording your narration, you want to record anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds of room noise without any other noise, right? So it's almost going to seem like you're recording silence, but if you're in an average room, you're actually going to hear some room noise. There may be like a little hum or a little air or even just the hum of the electronics as you're recording, right? Because you're not in a studio. So you want to record that. And then on this, I don't really have it. The closest I've got is probably this bit here because I had already done some noise reduction on this track. But you're looking for these gaps in your track. And then what you're basically going to do is you're going to use that as your noise print. Okay, so basically what you're saying to Audition is, let me sample the little bit of noise that you got from the room. Okay, and this works really well for voice tracks. Okay, it's a little more complicated for music because you'll be muting things when you do noise reduction. You always lose some fidelity, but with voice, you can compress it and do some noise reduction in a way that works very well. So I've got my noise print. So I'm going to do that. Capture noise print. And then what I have to do is I'm going to go up to the effects menu. And in my effects menu, there's a noise reduction, and I'm going to do the process. Now you need to do this process in the waveform view. Don't do this in the multi-track view because you're actually going to do the work on this particular file. So it's going to give me a little bit and it's going to give a waveform. You typically don't need to do anything different from this. Usually by default, the default noise reduction works pretty well. And what I'm going to do, the thing I forgot to do is with my noise print, highlight the entire track so that it will eliminate the noise for the entire track or the entire sound file. So then I go up to my noise reduction. I'm going to do the noise reduction process. This is fine. I'm going to apply it. And then it goes beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. Does its work. And see how it's gone now? And it's like, wow, magic. And if you listen to it, 95% of the time, it will sound a lot better. If it doesn't, always remember Apple Z or Control Z will undo what you just did. Okay. Another thing that you can do is see how I've got little ums, or you can hear like chatter or breaths. So like on this one, welcome. So I have a little bit of a breath there. So if you want to take that out, you can delete it, but then what happens is you've cut it too close to one another and it sounds unnatural, right? Because look at, hi everyone, welcome to SG. So if I cut this together, hi everyone, welcome to SGF. It sounds okay, but it sounds unnatural. So you're like, whoa, Grobes is bionic. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is you want to say, okay, I just want to remove the breath. An easy way to do that is to use your effects and just insert silence and it blanks it out. Now the thing you want to make sure is that it doesn't clip between these two parts. So what you can do is add a little bit of a fade out here. Usually it's under favorites. So I'm going to fade out, and then this part I'm going to fade in. And then it basically does a nice little, I'm going to fade out of this voice and clip into this one. Hi everyone, welcome to SG. See? So that way the breath is gone, it fades in and out nicely of that, and it still sounds natural. Because your goal of every podcast is to make sure all of your audio sounds as natural as it can be. That's another bit of advice that I would give you. Some of you who have less than optimal audio because you did a phone call or you talked to them on Zoom, that's okay. And people are fairly forgiving of it. What I would do is I would just introduce that. When I talk to so-and-so on Zoom, or because of the COVID-19 crisis, we were limited to a phone call, that kind of thing. That little explainer will go a long way in the listener's ears. The other thing that you want to do too is you want to make sure that you aren't playing too much of the bad audio. What you could do is paraphrase some of the insights and then really focus it on the best quotations that they're giving you rather than playing 5 minutes of that interview. You really want to trim up those interviews and distill them to their essence if you can at all. Okay, so that's noise reduction and that's silence. The other thing you might run into, you may have unbalanced audio. Now, all of your recordings are in stereo, but the way we hear voices is we really don't mind if it's in the center of the track. And so doing that centering, what you can do if it's just audio and you're not trying to capture any audio space, the thing that you can do is under favorites, there's this thing called convert to mono. So what I'm going to do is highlight the entire track and I'm going to convert it to mono. And what this does is it simplifies the track. It takes out some of the extraneous noise. And a lot of times that will make your voice track sound better too. But what I would do is I would do it in the sound files before you put it into the multi-track project. And then what I would do is the places where you need that stereo field. So maybe if you have music, or if you have, if a couple of you had outdoor sounds that you were capturing, you'd want that in stereo, so I have the audio field when I'm listening to it either in my car or on my headphones, which is how a lot of people listen to podcasts. But voices themselves, if you don't need that stereo field, then you can do this mono trick and it will help clean things up. My last bit of advice to you is when you're working on your sound files, make sure that you don't keep it in this view, right? Don't trust yourself to be able to cut audio here and be like, oh, I can just eyeball it and that's close enough. What you want to do is make sure you've zoomed in close enough to an area. So like, say I want to delete this little clip that I can kind of see that there's this little blurb before I go into this. So what I'm going to do is try to zoom into it, and you can use the top bar for the zooming in. And then you can add this to doing it this way so you can actually see what it is that you're cutting. And you can also expand it this way. Oop, I just lost it. So see, there's a little thing where I was spitting on the microphone or something along those lines. So I can see it now. Now I can just clip that out, and that way I see it. And it's much easier to see when you've zoomed in. So make sure you're totally zoomed in. Okay, the last thing that I'm going to show you here is doing fade ins and fade outs and then adding some music underneath your voice. Okay, so notice that I've got the tracks balanced here in terms of their volume. So my vocal track is, I've turned up the volume quite a bit. And on my music track, I've turned down the music to some degree. Okay, so that's going to be balancing. And then I have this, to get your envelopes here, that's you click on this little button here, and that gives me my ability to change the volume. You can change, you have some options. You can also change pan, but I'm only going to change the volume here. So what I've got here is I've got some audio and I've left a little bit of a clip and I want to add some sound. So because I've clipped this piece, sometimes when you do this, there may be a little clip at the end where it's obvious you've cut the audio off. And a couple of you have that problem in your podcast. So what you want to do is when you've trimmed a bit of audio, you basically want to add a slight fade out to that particular clip. So the way you do that is when you clip into a clip, click into a clip, sorry. See this little box? This is your fade box. So what you can do is I can grab this and I can define how I want the fade to go. And I'm just going to space it out a little bit, because if you go up and down, you can change the shape of the wave as it fades out. Okay, and you can play around with that a little bit. But really what you're wanting is you just want a very subtle fade out. And you can play around with this going up and down, but also doing the amount of time. You don't want to have too much time, because then the voice is gradually going to get quieter. You don't want that. You just want it to cut off nicely where you've clipped it. So we're just going to do a little bit of a fade out. And then what you want to do is a little bit of a fade in on the next clip as you're coming in, so I don't hear the clip when I come in either. Okay. If you blend these together, that's usually called a crossfade. Okay, so this one's fading out, this one's fading in, and it's a nice way to seamlessly blend two clips. But I'm doing it this way because I want the music to kick in first and then do this. So
358411. Feel free to follow us on Twitter.
So that's how I want the music in the background. Now what I'm going to do, so it comes in at full volume, and then I gradually fade it down. And you don't want the fade out to sound unnatural. So you need to find the right balance of how smooth is this transition out. So
feel free to follow us on Twitter or Facebook at SGF News.
So now the other thing about this little clip that I want you to pay attention to, any music or sounds that you're adding should complement it. It should not be the focus. So if you have like really dramatic music, or music that doesn't fit, or it's out of the tone, or that leads people to go, man, I really like that music, that's not achieving your goal. What it should be doing is adding to the mood and adding to the effect. It should not be the focus unless your podcast is specifically focused on music like Claire's is. Like Claire's, it's okay that she has those clips and she's talking about songs because that's a central part of her podcast. But for most of you, the music that you're going to add is really more mood setting. So you want to be very, very careful of the music that you're choosing and making sure it's not overwhelming the podcast, um, or create some sort of unintended expectation or feeling. Okay. So that's basically what I wanted to add. One last thing, as I've mentioned to a couple of you, if you have bad audio, that basically what you're going to want to do is do some voiceover and paraphrasing rather than using the long quotes. I mentioned that earlier. Find the ways to paraphrase and tell those stories and then using the best quotes from your interviews. That will be best. Okay. Great job on the first round. If you have any questions, reach out to me, and then I'll look forward to seeing what you come up with at the end of all this. So, thanks.